Good morning, good afternoon, depending on which part of the world we're joining from. We'd like to welcome everyone to this very interesting conversation on the new US-African relations. We do have, just before we start, we would have a quick note on the housekeeping rules. Just to note that your mics will be automatically muted as you log in, and you can send your questions in the Q&A box. And when sending your questions, please identify yourself and your organization. And if you want to speak, you kindly signify by raising your hand. We will eventually send the relevant materials after the webinar. So once more, welcome again. So just to have a rundown of the agenda for today, we will have the welcome address from Dipo, who is the president of the American Business Council, and Scott Eisner, who is the U.S. Chamber president for the U.S. African Business Center. Then we would have an overview and introduction from the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Nigeria, Beth, Leonard. And then we'll have the opening remarks from our special guest, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Akunna. And then we will move from there to the panel discussions with Ambassador Terence, McCulley, with Aubrey, and the moderator will be Gyude. It promises to be a very exciting conversation. And then we'll have a Q&A and remarks from two of the AmChams, the CEO from the AmCham South Africa, Angela Russell, and Aisha Bedwell, the president of AmCham Ghana. Angela, sorry, we do have a double L in your name, but I mean, maybe this is the way we spell this in Africa. You never know. Okay, so I will just hand over to Dipo. Over to you, Dipo.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Council, I welcome you all to this session of the US-Africa Relations. As you all know, Africa is a natural partner to the United States, and I would like to see more partnerships from the US that further help transform the African economy. Doing business in Africa has been very fruitful for those of us that do business within Africa, though fraught with challenges, especially for the US companies within the African markets. It's my hope that this meeting will set a pathway, as well as share more insights on what the US-Africa relationship will look like under the Biden administration, as well as what to look out for as an American company doing business within Africa. Thank you very much, Margaret.
Thank you, Dipo.
Thanks very much, Dipo, for your introduction and for your continued leadership of the ABC, and thank you, Margaret, for your leadership of the ABC as well. You've really made it into a powerhouse organization. On behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Business Council in Nigeria, and our AmCham network across the continent, I'd like to thank you all for attending. Today's conversation is an important one as the Biden-Harris administration further shapes its policies towards the continent. Certainly positive steps have been made and taken to engage the continent, including President Biden's remarks at the African Union Summit in February, conversations with African presidents from Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, and the reversal of travel bans on 6 African countries. On the continent, there are expectations that about the U.S. role in supporting Africa's post-pandemic recovery and what can be done to help attract needed investment and create jobs for youth across the continent. Earlier this year, the Chamber laid out 5 recommendations to the Biden-Harris administration. 1, make Africa engagement a presidential priority, including hosting Africa Leaders Business Forum, as similar as done in previous administrations, and do it as soon as feasible. 2nd, create coherence on Africa trade policy to include continued negotiations with Kenya on the free trade agreement while pursuing a more modern approach and comprehensive approach to trade with the African continent, including the engagement of the U.S. with the African Continental Free Trade Area. We need to deepen and expand progress of our whole of government approaches to enhance the competitiveness of U.S. businesses on the continent, including a focus on trade facilitation, regulatory cooperation, and intellectual property enforcement. We need to continue to enhance the role of U.S.-funded capacity building to strengthen the position of our interests at multilateral forum on the continent. And finally, we need to engage African governments on policy and regulatory best practices that support the growth of the digital economy and digital trade. This includes our urging action to host an annual summit that focuses solely on these key issues. Businesses are also interested to know about the fate of the Prosper Africa Initiative, the next generation of AGOA, the U.S. posture of the growing influence of countries like China, India, Turkey, and other leading economies in Europe. And today, we're delighted to have a distinguished panels of speakers and influencers around the U.S. trade policy agenda to start unpacking some of these issues and share their views on what the Biden-Harris administration could offer as solutions. But before we hear from the panelists, I'd like to now introduce our ambassador, Ambassador Mary Beth Leonard, the U.S. Ambassador in Nigeria, for her opening remarks. Ambassador Leonard is a career member of the Foreign Service and has deep professional ties to the continent. After joining the State Department in 1988, Ambassador Leonard served overseas in economic and consular offices in Cameroon, Namibia, and Togo. She has a distinguished career, having previously served as a representative of the U.S. to the African Union, ambassador to the Republic of Mali, and director for West African Affairs at the State Department. She's been a friend of the Chamber for many years, and we are indebted to her for her service to our country. Ambassador Leonard, I guess the screen is yours.
Why, thank you very much, Scott. And thanks, Dipo, too. And thank you for the American Business Council of Nigeria and the Chambers of Commerce in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa for helping to organize this event. The last year has brought us unprecedented change. Those engaged in markets across Africa are looking towards the future and anticipating what's going to come next. And while anxiety can be a source of anxiety for investors and businesses, it can also provide opportunity. And as we address the immediate economic fallout from the pandemic, we have the chance to address some of the more intractable issues facing Africa and the world. Governments and businesses must use this once-in-a-century economic recovery to reshape our approach to issues like climate change and security on the continent. What remains unchanged throughout the pandemic is, of course, our support for our partners in Africa. During the econ recovery, we're reinvigorating our dedication to investing in Africa, creating new opportunities for U.S. businesses, promoting our symbiotic growth. And we also recognize the new opportunities created by the challenges of our shared experiences throughout this global health crisis. For instance, the pandemic accelerated the migration of many economic activities and essential services onto online platforms. E-commerce has thrived as people around the world have turned to digital commercial tools to meet their needs more than ever before. Many of the U.S. government's longstanding initiatives that encourage economic ties between the U.S. and Africa are more important than ever, and will continue to seek new ways to advance our shared prosperity. Boosting trade is just so essential to unlock the full potential of Nigeria and other African economies. Expanding global trade relationships and attracting additional investment to Africa will be critical not just to support economic growth and development, but also to stimulate the economic diversification that is vital for the future, a future that provides good jobs for the large and growing youth population here in Nigeria and across the continent. One of my most important roles as ambassador is to advocate for mutually beneficial trade and investment opportunities. An enabling environment allows American companies to expand their businesses while creating jobs and growth and new horizons. And of course, the Prosper Africa Initiative seeks to substantially increase trade and investment between the U.S. and Africa. It leverages the resources and expertise of U.S. government agencies to help American and African businesses and investors identify partners, advance opportunities, and close deals. Since June 2019, U.S. government support has helped close more than 280 deals across 30 African countries worth over $22 billion. These investments and relationships lay the groundwork for the U.S. and countries throughout Africa to take advantage of new and emerging opportunities, such as the chance for enhanced market access through the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, or AFCFTA. In support of AFCFTA, we have provided technical assistance and funded exchange programs for officials in areas like trade facilitation and the digital economy. I so believe that economic recovery and long-term stability need to come from investment and economic-led growth. And the strong partnership that the U.S. government and U.S. private sector have established here in Nigeria and with our partners on the continent will serve as a foundation on which we can build a more prosperous and resilient future. As we look ahead to the next chapter of US-Africa relations, perhaps no one is more qualified to do so than our next presenter. I'm so delighted to see Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Akunna Cook, on the screen. Among her long history, she spent 10 years in the diplomatic service with overseas assignments in China, South Africa, and Iraq, but also several years in Washington working in the Africa Bureau, including overlapping when I was Director for West Africa Affairs. So I'm delighted to see her on the screen and to hand her over to all of your good hands. Thank you, Akunna, and lovely to see you and love to hear from you.
Thank you, Ambassador Leonard. It is great to see you, although virtually. As Ambassador Leonard mentioned, she didn't mention this, but she was briefly my boss in the Office of West African Affairs years ago when I covered Ghana, Togo, and Benin. And so it's wonderful to see her doing such a fantastic job in Nigeria. I have such a deep affection for and familial ties to. I also want to thank Mr. Faulkner and your team at the ABC for the opportunity to speak today. Scott Eisner, Aisha Bedway, Margaret, Maxwell, and of course our Principal Officer, Claire Pirangelo, for your efforts to strengthen U.S.-Nigeria business ties in Nigeria, in Lagos, and the Foreign Commercial Service team that leads our advocacy. I'd much rather be sitting in Lagos with all of you, or Abuja, or wherever you might be, and hope that I can do that soon, but I'm thrilled to have this opportunity. You know, one of the best parts of my new job is the opportunity to engage the private sector. As business leaders, I know you oversee operations not just in Lagos or Nigeria, but across the region and the continent. Thank you for working alongside all of our diplomatic missions to advance American interests in Africa. I want to speak briefly about the Biden-Harris administration and our priorities, and I then want to talk about the ways that Africa will clearly play a role, in particular the private sector, in advancing these priorities to include health, climate, an equitable and sustainable economy that works for everyone, democracy and governance, and racial justice, priorities that have emerged in the last year. We have to build back better, and that means ensuring we have a foreign policy that serves the middle class and prepares the U.S. economy to adapt to rapidly changing technological and social advancement. Rebuilding the American class involves creating new and better jobs, raising wages, and strengthening communities. Robust trade, investment, and commercial linkages with Africa will have to be a part of this equation. And that's something that I work tirelessly with my colleagues across the State Department and the US government, with the focus on a whole of government approach to increasing two-way trade and investment with the continent through programs such as Prosper Africa. African countries are our partners in pursuing our shared interests, including on global health, climate change, economic growth, and many other areas. Africa is influential on the global stage, and young Africans will be central to economic growth. I see great promise in investing in Africa's digital transformation, and I know many US companies are making investments in digital skills training to promote innovation in e-commerce. And I hope to hear more from you about what role the US government can play to support your efforts. We're obviously going through this global pandemic and the resulting economic crisis. It has taken an enormous economic and social toll on our societies, but it has also reinforced the importance of economic diversification, mutually beneficial growth and development, and expanded opportunities for our citizens wherever they are. We also see that we are more interconnected than ever, as you cannot stop a pandemic happening in the United States without stopping it around the world. So we're focused on responding to the COVID-19 crises. The State Department and USAID have thus far provided $500 million in emergency health, humanitarian, economic, and development assistance in sub-Saharan Africa to fight the pandemic. We know we have several requests from African countries for vaccines and understand the need. The US is working to boost Africa's access to COVID-19 vaccines on several fronts. First, through COVAX, through which we have donated $2 billion and pledged an additional $2 billion. And so far, 31 countries in Africa have received COVAX vaccines for a total of over 16 million doses, with roughly a quarter of those going to Nigeria. The U.S. private sector plays a role, and we know that the African Union and Africa Centers for Disease Control are working to finalize procurement deals with Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer for over 400 million doses. President Biden announced just a few weeks ago that the United States will send 80 million doses by the end of June, and I hope that we'll have more information on when and where and how those will be delivered, because obviously the needs are great. I also just want to touch on vaccine manufacturing support and enhancing the ability for vaccines to be manufactured in Africa. Just last week, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC, was part of a joint French-German IFC announcement committing to this effort, and more announcements are on the way. I know partners like you have been critical in the global response. The U.S. private sector in Nigeria has made in-kind and monetary contributions to support the Nigerian government's response to COVID. Your corporations have supported in many ways the strengthening of health systems across the region. American companies in Nigeria have been critical in boosting the Nigerian federal and state government's ability to scale up efforts to test and contain the disease, as well as helping to ease the suffering felt by Nigerians affected by the resulting economic fallout. We are all in this together, and our combined efforts are crucial to moving forward. COVID-19 has dealt sub-Saharan Africa a hard blow as the region entered a recession in 2020 for the first time in 25 years. In addition to our bilateral assistance, we are working through multilateral channels to help Africa recover. The U.S. has led G20 efforts to provide debt relief through the Debt Service Suspension Initiative and the Common Framework. This will allow low-income countries affected by COVID to suspend payments owed to official bilateral creditors until December 2021. The U.S. has also announced our support for additional allocations of special drawing rights from the IMF, which will boost liquidity for African countries. On commercial engagement with Africa, we are seeking a successful and sustainable development. We want to be partners in creating climate-friendly trade that secures good livelihoods for both African and American workers, and we know that U.S. companies are already working to seize upon these opportunities. Private sector engagement is key to driving economic growth and creating jobs in both Africa and the United States. And we are committed to increasing trade and investment with Africa because we have to build back better by boosting jobs and opportunities. And I'm eager to hear your perspectives as we move towards economic recovery. To that end, we are encouraging more businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, to take a closer look at sub-Saharan Africa. We want to address risk perceptions and see smaller companies as being more able to take advantage of opportunities in dynamic African economies. As we move forward with our economic engagement strategy for Africa, we are prioritizing small and medium-sized enterprises in the U.S. and Africa, the backbone of the middle class. We also are engaging members of the African diaspora in the United States who are interested in closer connections with Africa, including through increased trade and investment. I'd be interested in hearing from your perspective what we might be able to do to make these business networks more effective and sustainable. Our engagement also includes the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which provides beneficiary countries with duty-free access to U.S. markets for eligible products. Currently, 39 African countries, including Nigeria, are AGOA beneficiaries. We encourage these AGOA partner countries to take advantage of the program to increase jobs and economic diversification. The U.S. supports the African Continental Free Trade Area, the goal of attracting more of a more attractive and less fragmented market for trade and investment. Nigeria is obviously important to any and all engagements with Africa. We see Nigeria as a strategic partner and leader in the region. Nigeria is slowly recovering from the effects of the pandemic, and we know it has the potential to shore up and augment its position as Africa's economic powerhouse in the region. This will require difficult economic reforms, some of which have fortunately begun. We continue to advocate for lifting restrictions on foreign exchange reserves, which I know is a policy that greatly impacts your day-to-day operations. We remind Nigerian leaders that ad hoc policies or policies that are detrimental to commercial operations will undermine the business investment climate. I remain optimistic about what we can accomplish in Nigeria working together with our government and business partners. And I see that the US and Nigeria have similar struggles in protecting our communities from environmental degradation, rebuilding small businesses hurt by the pandemic, promoting gender equity, reforming our policing practices, pursuing accountability for those who use violence to destabilize our democracies, and ensuring the safety and prosperity for all of our citizens. I want to wrap up by talking a little bit about the future. There are a few ways that I'd like to suggest we can build the Africa we want with regard to a number of industries. But first, I'll start with the creative industries. We can work together on expanding economic opportunities across technology, digital, and the creative sectors with an eye towards ensuring that young people are prepared for the jobs and businesses of the future. While we want to support several sectors, I'm interested in the ways that we can explore creative avenues. We've seen that African creative industries represent a growing business market, for example, with Netflix's investment in Nollywood and other investments in the music sector. Africa's creative industries have a growing influence on American audiences. AFCFTA has the potential to provide AU member states with avenues to better promote and protect the many rich and vibrant aspects of African cultures through enhanced intellectual property protections, as well as expand their appreciation through access to new markets. The US government has supported these efforts through virtual forums for entrepreneurs and training seminars for trade negotiators, particularly on IPR, as well as exchange programs for AU Commission staff. We firmly believe in helping to empower young people to drive the digital transformation that will be key to not only the resilience of cultural and creative industries, but also to global economic recovery. Young people in Africa and young people in the United States will partner to lead us into the future. And with that, I thank you for your time and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Das Cook, for the very interesting perspectives you shared and the hope that you have shared with us, through what I'll really call the ride into the panel that we're going to start pretty soon. Just to remind the participants who just joined that you should please share your questions in the Q&A box, and we would try as much as possible to respond to that, because I also know that Das Cook is also present time and we need to kind of run fairly quickly on this. So I would hand over to Gyude Moore, who's going to be moderating the panel and who will obviously introduce the speakers and introduce the panel. So over to you, Gyude.
Thank you, and Secretary, thank you for your comments, and it's great to have you here this morning. I'm pleased to be moderating this panel, because I think this is an important conversation, one that needs to happen, and I couldn't be more pleased to introduce my colleague, my collaborator, co-worker, my friend, Aubrey Hruby. She's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. She's been advising private sector and governments in Africa for a while. And it's great to have her here. She's been writing about U.S. policy in Africa, especially U.S. commercial policy in Africa, for a very long time, and very interesting to hear from Aubrey today. We also have on the panel Ambassador Terence McCulley of McLarty Associates, along with he too shares deep understanding of commercial activity in Africa, has worked on the continent for a very long time, and brings that rich background today. And so I think for those who signed up today, you couldn't have asked for better panelists. And of course, we have the Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, who's also going to be on the panel. I wanted to start by giving the two panelists and just an opportunity to respond to offer opening remarks in response to what you heard from Ms. Cook. And then I will begin with the questions. So with ladies first, we'll go with you, Aubrey.
Thank you, Gyude, and thank you to the host. It's a pleasure to be here today. You know, it really was music to my ears, and I use that pun intentionally, to hear Akunna talk about the creative industries. That's been an area of passion of mine, and what I believe is a very distinctive and competitive area for American companies and the US government to support, especially as we often talk about US-Africa policy in its relation to our global competitiveness, especially vis-a-vis China. And so in that context, I think the creative industries is a very exciting area of activity. I think it speaks to the aspirations of a increasingly youthful, increasingly urban, and increasingly connected population across African markets. And it has special relevance to many of you on this call because of the Nigerian competitiveness in that space as well, and the collaborations we see in music and Hollywood and Nollywood. And so really that's just great to hear. And I think that it's exciting that this administration has so much Africa experience at a senior level. And that comes in people who have served in the region, but it also comes in the diaspora, and a broader view on inclusion and diversity within this administration. So I think it's off to a very good and interesting start. There are still some open Africa positions that we look forward to seeing filled and up and active. But I'll stop there and let Ambassador McCulley say a couple words before we jump into a more broad discussion.
Thank you, Aubrey. Ambassador.
Thanks, Gyude. Thanks, Aubrey. And thanks to the American Business Council of Nigeria for organizing this great discussion. I think that Scott and Ambassador Leonard and Des Cook really teed up the discussion very well. And like Aubrey, I'm very encouraged by the opening months of the Biden administration's approach to Africa. I think from a perspective of optics, there's a real change in terms of a desire to engage as true partners. Scott mentioned President Biden's speech, virtual speech before the African Union Summit in February. Active engagement across the continent from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel demonstrates that this administration really is keen to re-engage in Africa. But I'm especially encouraged by Des Cook's remarks about supporting trade and investment and really making the link between the domestic policy of building back better and demonstrating to American companies that they have an interest in investing overseas. Companies that export, that invest overseas tend to pay higher wages. That's creating jobs and creating prosperity at home, but it's also contributing to the development of African economies. So I think the approach is right, and focusing on health, on climate, on democracy and governance is certainly a welcome change of focus, which I think is going to just increase partnerships between African countries and the United States.
Thank you. And so I wanted to begin today to describe the relationship between the continent and the previous administration as strained, is being diplomatic. Yeah. And for Africans who are logging on today, in terms of changes, I already mentioned, the quality of Africa expertise that is in the administration, especially at high levels in the administration. But I wanted Des Cook to just talk a little bit more about, the substantive difference that Africans are going to see between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. Of course, it is still an American administration, so certain things are going to remain true, certain things are going to remain the same. But what are the clear differences that Africans can expect in terms of their relationship with the United States?
First off the bat, I think a mutual respect and the United States coming to a relationship with Africa from a place of humility and confidence. Humility because we recognize and have seen so much in the past year that there are many challenges that we're facing in the United States, climate, health, really thinking about how do we create a just and equitable economy that works for all communities? How do we deal with racial justice and police brutality? And as it turns out, these are some of the challenges that many of our partners in Africa are dealing with. And we see them not as, we don't see Africa as a client state, as a recipient of donor assistance, but we see African countries as partners and really working towards many of the challenges that we're facing jointly. We see ourselves in conversation with Africa, not making policy for Africa, but making policies with Africa to really address many of the common challenges that we're facing. And so as we're talking about youth and how do we address the joblessness rates or the need to upskill and reskill African youth for the jobs of the future? Well, guess what? Those are the exact same kinds of issues that we're facing here in the United States. And so we know that there's a lot of innovation in Africa. We know that there's a lot of creativity in Africa. And we know that Africans can, in many cases, solve some of the issues that we're dealing with. I mean, we can all now, log on to our phones, get on our phones and send money to folks around. I was just on Venmo and PayPal and all of these things. And mobile payment was really pioneered in Africa and really became popular there. That's just one example of how we are all facing an uncertain future, but one that is made brighter by being in partnership and really recognizing that Africa can be a true partner. I think that's obviously the hallmark. The rest of our policy will flow from that, right? The investments that we make in the relationship, the engagement that we have with our African partners, that all flows from a belief that we see Africa as partners that we have mutual respect for.
Thank you. And to our two panelists, I think the way I wanted to go about this is sort of, this is an opportunity for the American government to listen. It is an opportunity for the American government to listen to experts who think long and hard about this, who have experience in this region, but also to the participants who have questions, who have clarifications to help improve the quality of U.S. policymaking here. So my first question to you Mr. Eisner began by just listing 5 recommendations, and I thought they were pretty spot on in terms of U.S. commercial policy or engagement in Africa. So where I wanted to start was, if you were, advising the Biden administration now that it is re-engaging Africa, where would you start? We'll go with Terry first, and then Aubrey.
The 5 points that Scott made, I think, are right on target. What Africans have said for years is that in order to build their economies, to modernize their economies, they need investments in infrastructure. Ghanaian President Akufo-Addo spoke before the General Assembly in New York, I think in 2017, 2018, and he criticized the United States for not being present in the infrastructure space, creating space for the Chinese and others. I don't think that's entirely accurate, but I think if I were to make a recommendation was to the administration, it would be to focus on this infrastructure piece. And we have vehicles to do that. The BUILD Act established the Development Finance Corporation. Has $8 billion in projects on the African continent. We need to have a robust DFC that is really supporting investments in infrastructure. And we need to support US companies that are already looking at this space. ICT, as we've seen for COVID, the digital space is so important. And if you look at broadband penetration across Africa, South Africa is doing pretty well, Kenya is doing pretty well, other countries not so much. And yet there are American companies who are poised to fill this gap, from SpaceX, Starlink, to Viasat, to a startup called Genesis. The US government needs to use the tools that it has, Millennium Challenge Corporation, the Development Finance Corporation, and at the same time encourage the American private sector that is keen to invest in this space, help them overcome the regulatory challenges and the other challenges that inhibit them from really creating these investments and building out the broadband capability, which is going to drive recovery from COVID.
Thank you. Aubrey?
Yeah, I mean, listen, engagement is is a process, and I think it is something that is deep and should be both ways. And one of the things I think about often is that AGOA, which now has a 20+ year history, has deep brand recognition across the continent. You know, and I think part of that is its longevity, but part of the reason for the recognition of AGOA as a shift from aid to trade, which the US really led in back in 2000, is that because AGOA was co-developed in a way. You know, USAID always has this language about co-creation processes, and it was co-developed with African leaders about what kind of trade policy would work. And I think that that is a really area where we can distinguish ourselves by working with Africans to help shape the policies. So, you know, we know that the Biden administration is going to have a special focus on digital and digital realities and digital Africa. And I think that my challenge to the administration is there a way to structure engagement, especially in a technology world? Can you run a giant, you know, Twitter poll to see what young people care about? Can we do interesting focus groups with YALI fellows, for example? Can we actually co-create policies that speak to what African countries want to see, instead of saying, I think we have the idea, this is good, and this is how it's going to roll out? Only if, even though it might take longer to co-create, I think it builds a deeper sense of shared ownership and true engagement. You know, I think when we saw the last administration announce Prosper Africa, that was done at the Heritage Foundation, a think tank, and Gyude and I are obviously in one foot in the think tank worlds, but it was just announced and done and put forth, and it wasn't actually a co-created process. So I think that's one area I'd like to see, or at least challenge the administration to think about, and how to do that using new technologies, using a Zoom world, using all kinds of diaspora engagement as ideas that we have to really shape the policy in a new and interesting way, that the process should also be differentiated, not just the output.
Yeah, thank you. That's really really important in terms of if building back better would include bringing Africans along as partners, then co-developing the projects. Ms. Cook, I wanted to come back to you, and you get a chance to respond to out of what they said before. But in 3 days, there were 2 rallies in Africa where people were lifting signs, you know, praising Russia. One was in Mali, one was in Ethiopia. I raise those issues because the African continent now is a contested space. The United States is not the single and only actor in that space. There are others in that space. And most of the others, the Russians, you know, they advance their strength, that is security. The Chinese do it with infrastructure. What can we look for in terms of US policy that leads with American strengths?
I really love the way that you asked that question, because I think that it speaks to I think frustration that a lot of Africa watchers have about the way that we have talked about China, Russia, and others in Africa, which is almost from a space where we are chasing China, we're chasing Russia. And, you know, as long as we are chasing China, we are by definition number 2. And that is not something that we need to be, because the US has clear strengths. And one of the places that I see it is in innovation. The US is unmatched in terms of our ability to, around creativity, around our ability to imagine new technologies, and we have obvious strengths by the fact that the US is so diverse. I talked a little bit about the engagement that we hope to foster between diaspora communities, African diasporas and people of African descent in the United States with Africans around trade and investment, around culture, and around a number of areas. But, that is one of the unique things about the United States that makes this country so great, is that we have people from everywhere here, and including everywhere across Africa. We do need to focus on what we do well, and I'm particularly encouraged by so much of what we saw over the past year. The US has traditionally been the #1 places where people want to study. It has always been a place where people want to go because of the free exchange of ideas and the sense that the possibilities are endless. And I see a lot of potential in areas, as we've talked a lot about digital, but education technology. We are all facing this challenge of how do we empower and prepare our young people for the jobs of the future, which frankly have arrived. The last year has accelerated and pushed us into this place where we've all gone digital. We're doing this panel right here. 18 months ago, we would have been sitting around at a think tank potentially and doing this in person, but now we can be around the world and having this conversation. We can learn, my daughter's in the other room and she's in virtual school, completing 8th grade from our house, because we've now realized that that's kind of how we can do education. That's how we can do training. That's how we can co-create companies, entrepreneurs that are now realizing they don't all have to sit in Silicon Valley and Boston and New York. They can sit anywhere. And so, when we talk about where does the US lead, it's in innovation. It's in thinking about how we lead our economy into the future. And I think that that's where we will excel.
Thank you. And then I'll go to the panelists in terms of, in your recommendations to the American government in this contested space that is Africa, especially with other external actors. What would be your recommendations in terms of leading with American strengths there? Aubrey?
Well, I think I've spent a lot of time looking at American competitiveness vis-a-vis other global players. And I think that there are many areas, the creative industries we've talked about, financial services, technology and venture, and actually agribusiness as well, and technology and agribusiness, and some parts of renewable energy. So all of this is to say that the interesting part, I think, is that a lot of the areas of American competitiveness overlap pretty clearly with areas of kind of aspirational advancement that young people in Africa think about, right? And they like technology and fintech, and you really do see, for example, cryptocurrency. You see Nigeria being a major user of crypto and looking at applications with crypto. You see all kinds of platforms built on this digital backbone, and the digitization that was accelerated during COVID is only there to really amplify some of the things we do best. But we need to go quicker, we need to go bigger, we need to go harder, and that is something that we see. The evolution of the Chinese kind of commercial footprint in African markets has been quite rapid. It did start out very, very focused on infrastructure, particularly transport infrastructure, and government-to-government financing of transport infrastructure. But now you see, the techno phones have 57% of the smartphone market across the continent. You see those embedded with Boomplay. Boomplay does special, they do like series with African artists, musicians. And so you think about a technology stack, and you think about how the technology stack defines the future. And, in many ways, US entities are very present in the technology stack, especially on the application side. However, in many ways, they're not. And so that's why I'm eager to kind of see the Biden administration's approach to the digital future of the region, and how we can really package and support the companies, especially the smaller companies doing digital technologies and applications, so that they can discover the opportunities in African markets.
Thank you, Aubrey. Terry?
Yeah, Gyude, I absolutely agree with Aubrey. If you look at America's strengths in Africa, I would point to a couple of things. One is the traditional and kind of exceptional bipartisan nature of America's approach to Africa over the last 20 or 30 years. There's broad support in Congress for what we were doing in Africa, from PEPFAR to the President's Malaria Initiative to AGOA to the BUILD Act, which created the DFC, and that is a real strength. The other strength that we have, and far be it for me to defend the dumpster fire that is the previous administration, but if you look at the 54 nations in Africa, U.S. missions are only led in 3 places by political appointees: Morocco, Kenya, and South Africa. The rest of those missions are led by career diplomats with decades of experience in Africa, ambassadors and chargés. And notwithstanding the disparaging comments that the White House made in the previous administration about Africa, our foreign policy over the last 4 years has been carried out by these dedicated professionals. That's a real strength. I think that the current administration is moving both substantively in terms of optics in changing the way that we approach and we engage with Africans in partnership. So we have this base of terrific American embassies deployed throughout the continent. We need engagement at the senior level on a regular basis. And Aubrey has written eloquently about this, about the need to have more regular and senior level engagement through summits, through business summits, through senior leader summits, similar to President Obama's Senior Leaders Summit. The Japanese are doing it, as Aubrey's pointed out. The Chinese are doing it. The Russians are doing it. We need that senior level engagement to amplify and to support the work that we're doing on the ground, that U.S. business is doing on the ground in Africa.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more, and that's why I've been retweeting Aubrey's article this morning. I mean, one of the ways that we can demonstrate the quality and importance of relationships is the regularity of senior exchanges at a very senior level. And you know, for the last 20 years, the Chinese have been doing it, and you know, like Aubrey said, the Japanese have been doing it through TICAD. And the hope is that it becomes something permanent. That's something that's not just dependent on having a Democrat in the White House. It becomes a part of U.S. policy, a staple of U.S. policy toward Africa. I wanted to come back to Das Cook about this question. Oh, and then quickly before, for those who are on the call and listening in, and if you have any questions, please submit your questions in the chat, and we'll pose the questions to after a round or two of questions, we'll begin to take questions from the audience and pose them to the panelists. And the issue I wanted to bring up, you know, just we don't know ourselves, even for us listening and following the administration, if there's any detail on this. But the President Biden, in his conversation with the UK Prime Minister, raised the possibility of an alternative to China's BRI. In fact, it's now on the agenda for the G7 meeting. You know, that, you know, as Terry noted from the beginning, that places, especially in Africa, infrastructure is such a big deal, and to have, you know, no substantive American presence there, why, you know, continue to say no, don't let the Chinese do it, it's sort of difficult to take. Do we have an idea of what this would look like? Do we have an idea of what it would entail and what U.S. institutions would be used in terms of, obviously this isn't something that's been written yet, but because it's been announced and we're on this call and talking about U.S. and Africa, it made sense for us to at least brush the question.
Well, it is definitely the subject of live conversation right now, what the U.S. engagement in Africa is going to look like. And that is across many sectors and many different platforms. We've already touched a bit on Digital Africa, which will be part of that. We haven't talked too much about Prosper Africa, but that is also another program that increases two-way trade and is really an initiative to assist the private sector in terms of engaging, either making investments in Africa or trading with Africa, and really providing that kind of hand-holding for US companies that are looking to go to Africa, as well as working with African companies that are interested in the US. It's also looking at the enabling environment and making sure that the African countries are pursuing regulations that are going to be beneficial to them, to attracting investment across the board. But there are other initiatives, Power Africa, and how do we build on the great successes we've had with Power Africa, including climate-friendly infrastructure. So I don't have any announcements to make other than that we are actively looking at all of the economic engagement for the administration, and as soon as there's an announcement to make, President Biden and the White House will make it.
Thank you. We weren't looking for you to make U.S. policy on this call today. Thank you. So I will ask the panelists. That's just one more question, and hopefully we can go to our audience and for their questions. I was just looking at a tweet the other day, and we saw. Okay, 3 more minutes before. So hopefully you can your answers can be in 3 minutes. And saw that of the unicorns in Nigeria, I said almost Liberia because I'm Liberian. So InterSwitch, now Chipper Cash, Flutterwave, and even the one that's not yet a unicorn, Paystack. Most of them, in terms of the money behind them, are American, right? The big backers behind them are American. And I was talking to a Nigerian, someone who's really, really big in the Nigerian tech space, And my understanding is for many Nigerian startups, they're Delaware-based in terms of the registration, right? So when we hear of all of this money that's going into Nigerian tech companies, it starts off in Delaware, right? And so there is already a massive American presence in that space. What else can be done if the U.S. government were to encourage that and try to expand it? What would it look like in terms of being able to do that? The second thing I want to say is that when we think of U.S. presence in Africa, we tend to focus on the most recent arrivals in terms of the tech firms. But Coca-Cola has been in Africa forever, right? GE has been in Africa forever, and they understand the continent, they understand that market even more. What role can the U.S. government play with those who have a longer history on the continent in terms of U.S. commercial interest in Africa? Terry and then Aubrey.
Well, on the first part of your question, Gyude, I think it's important for the U.S. to play a more important role as the Africans begin to roll out the Africa Continental Free Trade area. The digital protocol on e-commerce is going to be critical, and I think that the U.S. could have an important role to play in providing technical assistance and ensuring that the private sector has a seat at that table as the negotiations on the digital protocol roll out, which will create an overarching space to promote opportunities for these exciting African entrepreneurs. On the second part of your question, you're right. There are companies that have been present in Africa for 100 years. We need to build on that model. We need to look at Coke and the John Deeres and the Caterpillars and the companies that are succeeding and doing well. And what can we learn? What can newcomers learn to help them overcome some of the challenges in these very important markets?
For me, Gyude, I think two things. I mean, we have long-standing American champions operating in African markets. We haven't yet been able to translate that into a wave of SMEs investing in the region in the same way that you saw large construction firms in China come and then lots of Chinese SMEs come after that. We haven't been able to do that because systematically Americans look at African opportunities through a lens of risk first. When they hear about things in African markets, they think risky, and that's just not true in other regions of the world. There's data showing that Chinese think about it in terms of a lens of opportunity. So I think using the large champions to share their experience and share their stories can help shape the perspective to be different and shift from a risk to opportunity. On the venture space and technology, I am very bullish on it. It's very exciting. You know, all of the players that you particularly named are fintech players that help reduce friction across borders when you talk about moving capital. And that's an important aspect of integration, and the fact that African markets are inherently small by comparison. And that's the result of colonial fragmentation of the continent. And so entities like, you know, Flutterwave are functionally reducing that friction, and they're making a larger market. Things I think that can be done is right now, you know, it's like Jeff Bezos investing in chipper cash, but there are so many diasporans and individuals that would love to do angel investing in African markets, and there haven't necessarily been the right vehicles or platforms. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to regulatory issues around broker-dealer law, about being an accredited investor, and just a space that's not yet clear or structured. And I think there's a lot that can be done around, you know, from Prosper Africa and other entities to support platforms that can help smaller investors and maybe smaller venture funds in the US find these opportunities. Usually there's always kind of four obstacles for getting American investment into African opportunities. And we systematically have to address each one of them. One, a lack of data and getting the right data and the right information. And there's a variety of ways to do that reason. Number two, a lack of network. So the number one thing I've been hired in my advisory business is who should we work with? Finding the right local partner. So that network kind of issue. Fourth, a structural. How is the actual ticket size understood in terms of the kind of size of investments American entities want to make and the size of opportunities and the structure in terms of timing. And lastly, visibility. You cannot invest in things you cannot see. And for all too long, entrepreneurs of color, whether they be in Africa or they in the US, have been invisible to main sources of capital. So that's why I'm passionate about the PR space and PR for impact and other areas, because you've got to make things visible. You have to make the opportunity visible. So an area of passion of mine, and it's something I could talk about at length, but I know we need to turn to the audience.
Thank you. And we have questions from the audience, and I will take the first two that are directed at Daskok, and then because we were running out of time. And the first one is from, you know, Abuja Chamber of Commerce. How do Africans gain access to U.S. plans on making it easier for SMEs to transact between the U.S. and Nigeria? Well, so this goes to Aubrey's point that she was just making. And then the second one is, are there specific programs for collaboration between young Africans and Americans, especially in the area of cybersecurity? That's pretty specific. But so that's good. Those two questions are from the audience for you.
So the first question was about how
can we know U.S. plans, right? Well,
I'm sorry, say that again.
How can we gain access to U.S. plans on making it easier for SMEs to transact between U.S. and Nigeria?
Got it. Okay, so ProsperAfrica.gov is the newly unveiled Prosper Africa website, and I mentioned before that Prosper Africa is our initiative to increase two-way trade, and part of the focus that Prosper has is working with small and medium-sized enterprises, particularly with a renewed focus on diaspora. So businesses that are owned by people from people of African descent, and really working to give them the kind of technical assistance that they might need as they are looking at opportunities in Africa. So I would encourage you to look there. I would also encourage you to look at the tools provided by the Department of Commerce, the USAID trade hubs, also provide tools, but Prosper Africa can help to navigate the many, many tools in the US government that are doing this. I would also just underscore a lot of what Aubrey was saying about really expanded network and access to finance for businesses, particularly businesses owned by people of color. You know, before I came back to foreign policy, I was focused a lot on this and looking at particularly Black businesses in the United States, and as it turns out, face many of the same challenges. And part of why there's so much potential for really building upon the relationship between the diaspora and Africa is that this, the perception of risk and this sort of the hurdles that we need to climb are a little bit lower for people who already have a connection to Africa. And so we're actively working on that. And I think the next question about connecting youth, I'll answer that by saying that we're also working on the youth strategy, building off of what we've been able to do with YALI, which now has 700,000 members of the YALI Young African Leaders Network. And young people can connect there to discuss and engage on a variety of issues. I don't know specifically about cybersecurity, but I'm sure that there's somebody in that 700,000 plus network that has the same interest in cybersecurity.
That's Cook. I know you have a hard stop in 2 minutes. So if you had any
I
parting
do.
words for our audience and for us, we would like to hear it now.
Yes, no, I would just like to thank Margaret and the other organizers who, Ambassador McCulley and Aubrey, for being a part of this and for inviting me to talk a little bit about US priorities in Africa, and particularly in the private sector. It's always good to hear from experts in the field and the audience members and members of the business community how we can better formulate policy that is really responsive to our shared goals. And so again, just want to thank you for the opportunity and look forward to doing this again soon and hopefully in person.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple more questions, and I thought we should pose those questions to the panelists now. And one is, so this isn't this, I guess it's a suggestion, and I'll look for sort of a response to it. And Abdulaziz says, you know, that for broadband penetration, we should focus on American companies that will help improve the last mile. Internet capacity is not the problem, but the last mile. We have 4 undersea cables into Nigeria and more coming. So I know that Ambassador, you said something, in your initial comments, you said something about, you know, Starlink, and I know Aubrey is excited about Starlink too. But the idea here is that in terms of advancing, creating that digital space where everyone can participate, we have to focus on the last mile and American companies that are in that space. Do you have any comments for that, to that?
I think Nigeria is certainly well placed because of the undersea cables, but that's not true across the continent. And that's why I think the focus needs to be on satellite-based broadband, so that you can reach, you have blanket coverage. And yeah, we need to invest in fiber, but I think that to really reach the last mile, to bridge that urban-rural divide, to really saturate the continent, you're going to have a series of satellite-based broadband solutions that offer access cheaper, that offer a wider bandwidth at an affordable rate. And I don't necessarily think that that's through hard infrastructure. You've seen that you know, Africa jumped a generation from landlines to cell phones. We need that kind of transformational jump from fixed architecture to a space-based architecture, which is really going to bridge that gap and reach the last mile, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. I'm really bullish on the space opportunities. Satellite, I think by definition, will do the last mile. And I also believe that the technology is going to reduce, the cost of this technology is going to reduce exponentially, and therefore will be affordable in African contexts, especially for, you know, a university or a clinic or, you know, kind of service platforms. So I'm very bullish, and it's an area where American companies are at least 15 years ahead. And that competitive advantage, I think, suits us. But there's other technologies, not just satellite. Gyude and I have followed the kind of failed and learning experience with Loon, with Google Loon, with the balloons. But there's also Spectrum, TV white space, a lot of technologies that are being piloted to deal with this last mile piece. And I think they're going to be rather transformational in African markets. The last thing I'd like to kind of think about is what's happened in India when the cost of data dramatically decreased. And if we can get the cost of data down to the average person, which, you know, is buying their data from their local telecom, whether that be an MTN or a Safaricom, et cetera, if they can get the cost of data down, because Africans pay a pretty high relative cost of data to their income, their GDP per capita and their monthly income, then I think you'll see a dramatic explosion of online platforms, the same way we've seen in India. So India is a good model for the kind of second wave of the internet revolution and what it means for transforming people's lives, but it also benefits American companies. So, you know, if you look at what happened in India, YouTube, after the cost of data dramatically fell, YouTube became the #1 search engine. Also, the number of YouTube channels with over 1 million subscribers went from like 26 to 680 in a matter of months because of the ability to stream data more cost effectively. So I think it's not just last mile. We also need to think about data costs to the average Nigerian or average Ghanaian or average Congolese, and think about how to reduce the cost, whether it's through regulatory improvements or further investment.
Thank you. There is a question here. Well, I guess the questioner thinks is a good place to start. Despite the long history of the U.S. and U.S. companies and U.S. engagement in Africa, why did China succeed so spectacularly in such a short time? Because China hasn't been as present on the continent for a long time. And they would like the panelists to sort of, you know, explain, I guess, why. And then the second question, so that we can be able to do that, try to cover these questions, is how would AfCFTA benefit U.S. trade, especially since the focus is supposedly on intra-Africa trade? Ambassador? So those are the two questions.
Sure.
Why did China succeed in that? Yes, sorry, go ahead.
No, let me just speak quickly. The second point, you know, Aubrey referred to it earlier. The size of markets sometimes is a challenge for U.S. companies. When I was in Cote d'Ivoire, vibrant economy, growing, but a market of only 24 million people, and sometimes for major U.S. companies, that's simply not big enough. So the AfCFTA offers the potential of a scale of a market of you know, more than 1 billion consumers, and so as the Africans organize to more effectively and more efficiently trade among themselves, that represents a larger market for large companies and significant opportunities for American SMEs as well. With China, lots of reasons, but look, let's be honest, disloyal competition. Practices that American and many other Western companies simply cannot pursue because of very strict regulations with regard to corrupt practices. I think the focus needs to be the previous administration in Prosper Africa characterized essentially as a great power competition among the United States, Russia, and China. I think that was insulting to Africans. The new administration, I think, is focusing on countering Chinese with regard as a disloyal competitor, ensuring that there's a level playing field for U.S. and Chinese and Russian and Turkish and other competitors. And that's really the way it needs to be, to really work with African partners to ensure that there's transparency, that there's a level playing field so that U.S. can effectively compete in the infrastructure space with China.
Aubrey?
Yeah, I mean, for me, listen, a couple things. There's so many myths in this China-Africa investment space. One thing is that the U.S. isn't present, and that's not true. The U.S. companies are major investors still in the region. But I would say, and the challenge is that China has approached projects with a very different approach that is not how U.S. structures investments or structures our commercial engagement. A lot of the speed of kind of Chinese visible engagement happened from government to government financing of infrastructure. And we don't do that. We are still debating at length, even today, the infrastructure bill in this country that's been being discussed for 10, 15 years. And we're not building our own roads and we're not building our own bridges. The last thing we're going to do is be able to go around the world and build those things. And so my view is, yes, there's been a rapid evolution of the Chinese commercial footprint, and the U.S. hasn't evolved as much. We started more diversified, meaning like all different sectors, GE and Chevron and P&G and Coca-Cola and all kinds of broad-based companies were investing. We just haven't rapidly evolved in the same way to include large waves of SME investments. And you just see a lot of little Chinese factories popping up on the continent, and that's because there was your cousin was working on the rail project in Kenya, and then he calls his cousin in Chengdu and says, there's a need for a shoe factory. You have a shoe factory. The guy says, oh, interesting. He comes out and sees it. Then he builds a shoe factory in Kenya. You see a lot of that. Which is small SME manufacturing space happening. And that is not necessarily what the US does. We have a lot of discussion here about manufacturing in this country. So I think where you will see a change and you do see evolution is in this high-tech space and in the venture space. And in diaspora, angel investment, things of that sort is where we do see a lot of dynamism in the U.S. African commercial relationship.
Thank you, Aubrey. Margaret, it looks like we're closing in on our time, right?
Yeah, it looks like the conversation is very exciting, but at some point we would have to go. So yeah.
So I would just at this point I would just give the panelists, just like a final word and then turn it back over to Margaret. So Ambassador, you first, and then just final words. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about programs and what the U.S. government should be doing. And I'm sorry that Akunna had to leave, but I see Ambassador Leonard is still on. The U.S. government needs to invest in people as well. I think the DFC offers extraordinary opportunities for U.S. business to support for U.S. business investing in Africa, and they've deployed advisors in the various regions. That needs to accelerate. And I'm not naive about redeploying human resources, but we need more foreign commercial service presence in American embassies overseas to support U.S. business and to support ambassadors to do their mission for Prosper Africa. And we need more consular officers, frankly, because if we're talking about people-to-people exchanges, about facilitating travel and facilitating business, then Africans need to be able to get visas to come to the United States. And we have invested and deployed resources to China, to Brazil, to other places where the visa load is exceptional. If we're serious about engaging in Africa, we need to build up our consular sections so that people don't have to wait for months to get visas to go to the United States or to do business in the United States. So invest in people as well as programs.
Thank you, Ambassador.
He provides a perfect framing for how I would say it's not this the people and the programs, it's also the process of engagement. Like I said earlier, I think we have an opportunity through technology to engage and to develop, co-create policies that have meaningful buy-in on both sides of the Atlantic, and really have a way to then be implemented because people understand them. You won't have the case where, with Prosper Africa, 1-2 years after it was announced, people still don't understand what it is, don't understand how it's going to be rolled out, et cetera. So I think it is the programs, it's the people, but it's also the process. And I think we have ability to innovate on all three of those vectors. So it's really been a pleasure to have this conversation today.
Thank you. And then I'll turn over to Margaret, who has the AmChams, the chairs of the AmChams, who I guess have comments. Margaret, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gyude. Thank you for the fantastic moderating. I'd like to once again thank Ambassador Terence, McCulley, and Aubrey, and also Ambassador here, the U.S. Ambassador in Nigeria here, the Ambassador Leonard, Beth, and Beth, Leonard, and also just to emphasize that we appreciate the fact that the ATC actually is sponsoring this American Car Cooperation, and we really appreciate what they have done to make this also a great success. I see that Scott is also still here. Thank you, Scott. I'm handing over now to my colleague and my friend in South Africa, Angela Russell. Angela,
thanks, Margaret. Thanks very much. And for me, it's a great thank you. I think it was really a fascinating conversation that went in so many different directions, and really thank you to Des Cook for that, and also to both ambassadors and Aubrey for that. And I just think, that there is so much diversity in Africa. There's so much opportunity on the continent. And I think it's an exciting place to be. I know from a South African point of view, the Americans are definitely, there's an air of favorability that we're feeling since the Biden administration has come into being. And I think like most African countries, we definitely are grappling after the effects of the pandemic. We currently only sitting at about 1 million people who are vaccinated, about 0.8% of our population. So we're still going to see the after effects of the economy happening within the South African context until we hopefully get fully vaccinated towards the end of the year. But I think a lot has been said about the different areas of focus, digitalization. I think education is something that's critical to ensure that the African youth are educated properly for the jobs of the future. And again, foreign direct investments, particularly within South African context, is going to be critical for us to kind of get out the economic slump that we are seeing. And I think really important, and exciting to look forward to how do we actually look at those opportunities with the SMEs. And I know we are doing a little bit of work to try and look at smaller chambers within the America that can kind of talk to some of our members and smaller, Black-owned businesses, for example. So really, Margaret, I think fascinating conversation, and thank you so much to everyone concerned.
Thank you very much, Angela. We obviously have a lot of work cut out for us moving forward. I would like to hand over to the president of the AmCham Ghana, Aisha Beth. Aisha, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let me just see if you can all see me, hopefully. Yeah, okay. So to echo what Angela said, that was a really interesting and very useful conversation. Not to repeat some of the things that she said, but I think what Aubrey mentioned about the importance of the visibility of venture capitalists. I mean, I've had a personal experience with that, where I was trying to help a company I was mentoring in my private time access some kind of venture capital platforms, and they're very difficult to find and get access to. So I think that's a really important part that was raised. And recognizing the fact that Africa does have a lot of SMEs, it's not that easy for businesses to scale up. And so being able to meet them at their need, similar to what was mentioned the Chinese are doing, will go a long way. I think digitalization is an important aspect. As you know, a lot of Africans do have access to smartphones and do have access to the internet. And so reaching them in that area in different ways, through education, through opportunities, through jobs actually, would go a long way in helping us move to the next level. So very interesting points were discussed. I think it's important that we keep these conversations going and we keep that relationship that we have with the US, which is really strong. And as chamber heads, we keep influencing the conversation with the feedback we get from our members and also the countries that we operate in. The reality on the ground needs to be communicated so that we can meet each other in the middle and where it matters the most. So thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this conversation. I think the points are really useful. And I think we're all going to take it back to our various chambers and our countries and see how we can work together to improve things going forward. Thank you once again. And thank you, Margaret, for organizing all of this. And thank you for everybody who played a part. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Margaret,